Hey everyone, I'm your author June. Before we get started, I really would appreciate it if everyone could hit the subscribe button. It helps me grow the channel, and I would love for all of you to come on this journey with me, as a family. Now, let's get into the story. Let me know if you enjoy. Dust devils spun like malevolent dervishes across the cracked earth as Jed rode into redemption. The settlement was a mirror reflecting his own decay. Buildings, ravaged by sun and wind, sagged like weary bones, and the cloying tang of stale beer mingled with the bitter fragrance of bygone dreams. A fitting perfume, he mused, for a soul seeking oblivion. He'd dodged his personal demons for years, but flight had become a wearying endeavor. Redemption a cruel jest. He dismounted before the Rusty Spur saloon, its time-worn facade a ghost of its former self. The saloon's twin doors protested with a rusty shriek as he entered, hinges moaning a dirge of broken vows. Inside, gloom reigned, the air heavy with pipe smoke, and the lingering echoes of forgotten conversations. Sparse patrons populated scattered tables, their faces maps of hardship and resignation, reflections of Jed's own weariness. A pianist, fingers yellowed and contorted, hammered out a tune as discordant as Jed's life. He navigated to the bar, the floorboards underfoot offering their own grim commentary. The bartender, a gruff man with a face like a bulldog chewing gravel, lifted his gaze with a sigh that spoke volumes. "Well, Jedediah Stone, haven't seen your hide around here lately," he grated, his voice a rasp. "Figured you'd become worm food by now." Judd brushed aside the barb, fixing his attention on the liquor bottles behind the counter. "Whiskey," he requested, voice parched and rough from neglect and too many miles. "Straight, and don't let the glass gather dust." Clem, as Jed vaguely remembered him, poured a hefty measure and slid it forward. Jed tossed it back, the fiery spirit carving a fleeting trail of warmth, a temporary anesthetic against the memories that gnawed at his core. He slammed the empty glass. "Again." Clem complied, his eyes gauging Jed's state. He'd witnessed this scene countless times. Men seeking solace at the bottom of a bottle, only to discover despair waiting to swallow them whole. "Hard road?" he inquired, a surprising gentleness in his tone. Jed's jaw clenched. "You have no inkling." He offered no further explanation. His past was a cross he alone would bear, a private torment. He'd spilled enough, caused enough suffering. The world needed no recital of his failings. He downed another shot, the whiskey offering scant relief to the throbbing in his soul. He saw their faces swimming in the liquor. Caleb, his brother, sprawled lifeless in the dirt. Sarah, her eyes wide with terror as the outlaws converged his father, his face a rigid mask of disappointment as Jed rejected their shared values. "Lost something, Jed?" Clem's voice sliced through his thoughts. "Everything," Jed whispered, barely audible. He peered into the amber depths, seeking answers, escape. But he saw only the reflection of a fractured man, haunted by his history, devoid of hope. A phantom haunting his own existence, condemned to wander, forever plagued by regret. He signaled for another whiskey, then another. The saloon swam before him, the piano's melody dissolving into a muffled drone. He registered Clem's wary gaze, the other patron's hesitant avoidance. He was beyond caring, utterly adrift. Abruptly, the saloon doors burst open, a wedge of sunlight momentarily blinding him. A woman stood silhouetted in the entrance, framed by the light. Tall and lithe, with hair the color of spun moonlight. Even through the haze of alcohol, recognition fled. Ellie Monroe. The name surfaced, a long-suppressed plea. He hadn't seen her since his flight from redemption, hadn't allowed himself even to dream of her. She epitomized everything he'd squandered, everything he'd abandoned. She entered, her gaze sweeping the room. When she found him, her expression betrayed no surprise, no rancor, no condemnation. Only a profound melancholy that lanced deeper than any blade. She approached, her steps even and measured. He yearned to flee, to vanish into the shadows, but his limbs remained unresponsive. He was ensnared, transfixed by the gaze of the one woman capable of reaching the man he once was. "Jedediah," she spoke, her voice soft and melodic, akin to a gentle breeze. A voice he'd craved for eons, now a brand searing his heart. He remained silent, unable to speak. He simply stared, his pulse hammering. He was a wreck, a shattered husk. He was unworthy of her attention, unworthy of her compassion. "I heard you were back," she continued, her eyes never wavering. "I wasn't certain it was true." "What do you want, Ellie?" he finally choked out, his voice coarse and uneven. "I want to know why you're here," she replied, her voice steady. "Why you've returned to redemption." He averted his gaze, unable to meet hers. "It doesn't matter," he muttered. "I'm just passing through." She remained unconvinced it resonated in her eyes. She knew him far too intimately. She recognized the darkness lurking within, the consuming guilt. But she also saw the ember of goodness he desperately tried to smother. "It does matter, Jedediah," she insisted, her voice resolute. "You matter." Her words struck him like a punch to the gut. He didn't matter. He hadn't mattered in years. He was a stain on the world, a blight on everything he touched. "Don't," he pleaded. "Don't say that. You don't know me anymore." "I know you better than you believe," she countered, her eyes brimming with empathy. "I know the man you were, the man you still have the potential to be." He shook his head, his chest aching with an unnameable pain. "That man is dead, Ellie," he confessed, his voice filled with despair. "He died a long time ago." "Then perhaps it's time to resurrect him," she proposed, her voice low but firm. "Perhaps it's time for you to find your way home, Jedediah." Her words hung in the air, a challenge, an invitation, a promise. He longed to believe her, to seize the hope she extended. But the darkness within held too firm, the guilt too crushing. He was too far gone, too broken to be redeemed. He gazed at her radiant face, at her compassionate eyes. He didn't deserve her. He never had. But for the first time in years, he detected a flicker of something beyond despair, a glimmer of hope, a twinge of yearning, a spark of love. He drew a ragged breath, locking his gaze with hers. "I can't, Ellie," he whispered, barely audible. "I just can't." He pivoted, snatching the whiskey bottle and heading towards the exit. He needed to escape, to flee as far and as rapidly as possible. He couldn't confront her, couldn't confront the prospect of salvation. He was too damaged, too sullied. As he neared the doors, her voice reached him. "Jedediah," she called, her voice laced with quiet conviction. "Regardless of what you've done, whatever specters pursue you, you don't have to face them alone. I'm here for you, always." He didn't pause, didn't turn back. He stepped out into the dusty street, leaving Ellie in the saloon, her words reverberating in his mind. He was aware he was committing a grave error, rejecting the one soul who could rescue him, But he was powerless to resist. He was Jedediah Stone, the man destined to run, the man destined to ruin everything he encountered. And some things were simply too shattered to mend. A melody from the past, the bat-winged doors crashed inward, a temporary eclipse of the desert glare. The room stilled, a communal holding of breath barely perceptible before Jed pinpointed its cause. Ellie Monroe. She moved with a serene poise that seemed jarring against the backdrop of scattered straw and stale liquor. Her frock, plain cotton, was immaculate, a bold contrast to the soiled attire of the saloon's usual denizens. Clasped in her hands was a small wooden alms box, collecting for the church's repairs, no doubt, the same sanctuary he'd abandoned years ago. A familiar wave of remorse washed over him. He'd caught snippets of her life, of course, her assumption of her late father's mantle, her transformation into redemption's very soul, a light of encouragement in a town flirting with ruin. He'd steered clear, deliberately avoiding any possibility of encounter. But here she was, her presence a stark reminder of all he'd squandered, all he'd cast aside. Ellie progressed between the tables, her smile genuine as she greeted the patrons. Some touched their brims, others offered mumbled apologies. A few, emboldened by rotgut, made brazen overtures that she parried with practiced grace. Her eyes, the unforgettable hue of jade, swept the room, as if searching. Then they snagged on his. The world contracted. The clink of glasses, boisterous guffaws, the somber piano tune faded to a distant drone. It was as if they were alone, encased in a bubble of shared history and stifled sorrow. He glimpsed a flash of shock, quickly superseded by a wave of melancholy. He knew he must appear ravaged. His garments were road-worn and grubby, his face haggard and unshaven, carved with the brutal etchings of sleepless nights and bitter recollections. A spectre of his former self, a far cry from the vibrant, hopeful woman now before him. Jed's grip tightened on his tumbler. He longed to vanish, to dissolve into the shadows and evade the inevitable reckoning. But he was frozen in place, immobilized by a cocktail of guilt, shame, and a yearning he presumed long extinguished. Ellie drifted towards him, her pace measured and resolute. Each step resonated like a knell against his already fractured composure. He yearned to speak, to utter some sound, anything, to shatter the suffocating silence. But the words lodged in his throat, choked by years of regretful silence. She halted at his table, her gaze unwavering. "Jedediah," she breathed, her voice a poignant tune from a distant, brighter era. He winced at his full name, a moniker unheard in such tender tones in years. "Ellie," he rasped, his voice roughened by disuse. A small, sorrowful smile graced her lips. "It's been a long time. Too long," he conceded, the words a bitter acknowledgment of his self-imposed banishment. The silence thickened between them, heavy with unspoken confessions and buried sentiments. Jed averted his eyes, fixating on the amber liquid swirling in his glass. He could feel her scrutiny, probing, trying to decipher the man he had become. "I heard you were back," she said at last, piercing the strained quiet. "In redemption, I mean." "Just passing through," he prevaricated, the words leaving a metallic taste on his tongue. He had no intention of passing through. He was here to succumb. A veil of disappointment clouded Ellie's countenance. "Is that so?" He nodded, still unable to meet her gaze. She wouldn't buy it. Ellie had always possessed the uncanny ability to see through him, to perceive the ember of goodness he so desperately tried to smother. She gestured toward the offering receptacle. We're trying to collect enough for the church's new roof. The old one, well, it's certainly showing its age. He knew it. He had likely assisted in its construction during his younger, more virtuous days. Jed dug into his pocket, extracted a fistful of coins, and dropped them into the container without looking. He didn't bother to count. It wasn't about the paltry amount. It was an attempt, however futile, to lighten the crushing burden of his culpability. "Thank you," she responded, her tone sincere. He grunted in reply, still shunning her gaze. "Jedediah," she began again, her voice now softer, more hesitant. I've been giving you some thought." His head snapped up, his eyes finally connecting with hers. He perceived a blend of concern, sadness, and something undefinable in her eyes. Hope? Pity? He couldn't discern which would be worse. "Don't," he snapped, his tone laced with warning. "Don't waste your energy on me, Ellie. I'm not worth the effort." Her brow furrowed in gentle admonishment. "Don't talk like that. It's the unvarnished truth," he insisted, his voice escalating. "I'm a broken man, Ellie, beyond redemption. Just leave me in peace." He saw a fleeting flicker of anguish in her eyes, a swift glimpse of the torment he had inflicted upon her years prior. He immediately regretted his abrasive words, but he was powerless to retract them. He was what he was, a man who spread sorrow and destruction to all within his orbit. "I don't accept that," she stated quietly, her voice resolute despite the evident pain. "I know there's still goodness in you, Jedediah. I see it." "You're mistaken," he said, his voice barely audible. "You're wrong, Ellie. Just go." He pivoted away from her, presenting her with his back, signaling the end of their exchange. He couldn't endure looking at her any longer, to witness the disappointment mirrored in her eyes. He didn't deserve her kindness, her compassion. He didn't merit her forgiveness. Ellie hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering in the air as if contemplating a touch. But then, with a sigh that betrayed suppressed emotion, she lowered her hand and turned. He heard the soft whisper of her skirt as she departed, the muted chime of coins within the collection box. He maintained his posture, shoulders slumped in defeat. Upon reaching the doors, she paused, glancing back at him one final time. Their gazes met once more, a silent exchange of unacknowledged feelings. Then, with a lingering look, she stepped into the sunlight, leaving Jed isolated in the gloom, haunted by the phantom of what once was. Shadow of the snake, the sun hammered redemption, blurring the dusty main street into a mirage. A lone hawk wheeled in the azure, its shadow a fleeting coolness against the relentless light. The painted facades of the buildings shimmered with heat, advertising wares from calico to corrals. The only sounds were the rhythmic squeal of a porch swing and the anvil's distant song from the smithy. Just another lethargic afternoon, until the earth began to vibrate, not with a storm's rumble, but the gathering thunder of hooves. The vibration grew to a roar, then to a deafening cascade. Heads snapped up. The porch swing stilled. The blacksmith's hammer lay silent. An icy premonition gripped the gut, a nameless dread settling over the town like dust after a fall. They erupted into town like a desert squall, a band of riders cloaked in grit and shadow. Leading them was a figure notorious as a viper, Cletus Snake Thompson. A whipcord of a man, his gaze like obsidian shards under a battered brim. His lip curled in a cruel smile, revealing teeth the color of aged ivory. A snakeskin belt, the source of his chilling alias, cinched his waist above a well-worn holster. Behind him rode his crew, a scavenging flock of renegades and desperados. Each face was a landscape of hardship and malice, men who had witnessed too much humanity and felt too little of it, their allegiances bought with the promise of loot and the sting of fear. A cloud of dust swallowed the light as they charged into redemption. Ellie Monroe stood before the general store, a humble wooden box nestled in her hands. She was collecting donations for the new church roof, and the townspeople, generous of spirit, had offered what they could to the endeavor and to the young woman who had become their guiding light. But as the riders plunged into town, Ellie's cheerful demeanor wavered. In their eyes she saw a predatory gleam, a promise of impending chaos. Snake hauled back on his reins, his horse stamping the parched ground, its breath a ragged rasp. He scanned the town with blatant contempt, his gaze lingering on the anxious faces gathering on the boardwalk. He saw their fear, he fed on it. It was the currency he traded in, the power he craved. "Well now," he drawled, his voice a gravelly rasp that echoed in the sudden quiet. "Seems we've crashed a quilting bee." A chorus of guttural laughter erupted from his gang, bouncing off the false fronts of the buildings. The townsfolk shuffled, their eyes flickering between Snake and his men, hands edging towards weapons, real or imagined. Snake dismounted, his boots striking the parched earth with a heavy thud. He sauntered toward Ellie, his gaze intense and unsettling. She stood tall, her chin lifted, her eyes unwavering. "Afternoon, ma'am," Snake said, his tone oozing false charm. "What's a blossom like you doin' out here all alone?" Ellie swallowed, her grip tightening on the collection box. "I'm collecting donations for the church," she replied, her voice clear despite the tremor in her heart. Snake feigned surprise. "The church, you say? Well, ain't that saintly? But building churches costs a king's ransom, don't it? A whole heap of money." He nodded at the collection box. "That little thing ain't gonna buy you more than a prayer." He reached out, his hand engulfing hers, his fingers clamping around her wrist. Ellie winced, but stood her ground. "Tell you what, ma'am," Snake murmured, his voice dropping to a viperous hiss. "Why don't you just hand that little box over to me? I'll make sure it gets where it needs to go." Ellie met his gaze, her eyes alight with defiance. "This money belongs to the people of redemption," she said. "It's for their house of worship, not for you." Snake's smile vanished, his eyes narrowing to slits. "You cut me deep, ma'am," he spat, his voice hardening. "I'm only trying to be helpful. But if you aim to be difficult—" He yanked on her wrist, pulling her close. The wooden box slipped from her grasp, hitting the ground with a muffled thud. Coins sprayed across the dusty street, flashing in the harsh sunlight. Snake's gang howled with laughter, their faces alight with anticipation. The townsfolk watched, paralyzed, their hands clenched, their faces bleached white. "Pick 'em up," Snake commanded, his voice like frozen shale. "Pick 'em up, and maybe, just maybe, I'll let you keep a few for yourself." Ellie gazed at the scattered coins, then back at Snake, her eyes filled with a profound sadness and contempt. She understood his game. He wasn't merely after the money. He was trying to crush her spirit, to shame her before her people. She knelt, her fingers touching the dust as she began to gather the scattered coins. Her movements were measured, her gaze fixed on the ground. Snake watched, his smile returning, believing he had won. But as Ellie gathered the last of the coins, rose, her eyes blazing with newfound conviction. She extended the collection box to Snake, her hand trembling barely perceptibly. "Here," she said, her voice ringing with steel. "Take it. Take every last cent. But you will never take my faith. You will never take my hope, and you will never take the heart of redemption." Snake stared at her, a flicker of surprise warring with his anger. He had anticipated a breakdown, a plea, a whimper. Instead, defiance. He snatched the collection box, his fingers grazing hers. "We'll see about that," he growled, his voice a low, menacing rumble. "We'll see how long that spirit lasts." A spark of redemption sunlight blazed off the silver spurs of Snake's boots, amplifying the threat he projected. Ellie stood defiant, chin high, though Jed noticed the fine tremor in her fingers. A familiar, unwelcome chill seeped into his core, a sensation dormant for years. The protective instinct, once a constant companion, had stirred. He moved, not with haste, but a measured, unhurried gait that commanded attention. Each footfall, a dull thud against the arid earth, resonated in the sudden quiet. Reaching Ellie, his shoulder nearly brushed hers, the clean scent of lavender from her dress, a sharp contrast to the dust and whiskey that clung to him. "The lady declined, Thompson." Jed's voice, a low rasp honed by hardship, held a quiet menace. He kept his gaze fixed past Snake's shoulder, focusing on a distant point, a trick learned in rough taverns, maintaining awareness without tipping his hand. Snake punctuated the silence with a stream of tobacco juice. "Well, look what crawled out of the woodwork. Stone. Heard you were kicking around, rusting in some backwater corner. Thought you'd swallowed your tongue." Jed remained silent, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw the sole indication he'd heard. A confrontation was the last thing he wanted, but retreat was not an option. "This ain't your concern, Stone." "Just a simple transaction," Snake insisted, the false bonhomie ringing hollow. "The lady's being difficult. Anything involving you harassing Miss Ellie is my concern," Jed countered, his voice still low, yet carrying a sharp edge. "And strong-arming a house of worship doesn't qualify as honest business." A ripple of disquiet spread through Snake's crew. They were accustomed to easy targets. Frightened townsfolk. This was different. This was a man who radiated an unsettling calm, as if he'd stared into oblivion and found it mundane. Snake's eyes narrowed, darting from Jed to Ellie and back. He recognized the set of Jed's shoulders, the coiled readiness in his stance. Rumors had circulated about Jedediah Stone in his prime, whispers of a gunslinger with lightning reflexes. He dismissed them as exaggeration, the folklore that inevitably clung to anyone with a violent past. Now, those glacial gray eyes gave him pause. "You're a fool, Stone," Snake sneered, his hand hovering near his revolver. "This ain't worth dying for." "Perhaps not," Jed conceded, his voice remarkably even. "But it's worth killing for." The air vibrated with suppressed violence. Each breath seemed amplified, every rustle of fabric a deafening crack. From behind shuttered windows, the townsfolk watched, their faces etched with a mixture of dread and morbid fascination. Ellie touched Jed's arm, her grip light but firm. "Jed, please," she murmured, her voice lost in the frantic rhythm of his pulse. "Don't." His gaze softened momentarily, a fleeting glimpse of vulnerability. He saw the fear mirrored in her eyes, the concern he didn't deserve, and something else, a fragile ember of hope. "Go inside, Ellie," he urged, his voice surprisingly gentle. "This is no place for you." She hesitated, her fingers tightening on his arm. "I'm not leaving you." "Please," he repeated, his eyes pleading with her. "For me." Reluctantly, she nodded, her gaze locked on his. She turned and walked towards the church, her steps measured and hesitant. At the doorway, she glanced back, her eyes reflecting a complex blend of fear and of faith. Jed refocused on Snake, his eyes hardening once more. He saw the calculation in the outlaw's face, the internal assessment of risk. Snake knew he was outgunned in a direct confrontation, but numbers were on his side. "All right, Stone," Snake conceded with a mirthless smile. "You win this time, but this ain't over. Me and my boys will be back, and next time your luck runs out." He spat, the glob landing close to Jed's boots, then turned and swaggered towards his horse, his gang trailing in his wake. They mounted and thundered out of town, the echoes of their departure fading into the stillness. Jed watched them depart, his hand instinctively moving towards his empty holster. The phantom weight evoked a flood of memories. Gunsmoke, blood, the stark sound of gunfire. A past he'd buried, a life he'd believed he'd abandoned. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, attempting to exorcise the ghosts. He needed focus. He needed to protect Ellie. He needed to atone for the sins etched on his soul. Turning, he walked towards the church, the slanting rays of the setting sun painting long shadows. He couldn't predict the future, but he knew one thing: Ellie would be safe, even if it demanded confronting his inner demons, even if it cost him everything. He owed her that. He owed it to himself. Old ghosts. New threats before the dust devils kicked up by Snake Thompson's hasty departure could settle. A buggy creaked onto Main Street. Its driver, mirroring the fatigue etched on his sway-backed mare, was Sheriff Brody. Brody. His bulk threatening to burst the seams of his uniform, descended with a grunt. His starched hat sat askew, its tin star catching the weak sunlight as he lumbered toward the onlookers. "What's all the commotion?" he rasped, his voice like sandpaper against dry wood, honed by years of mediating disputes and wrangling wayward cattle. He halted abruptly at the sight of Jedediah Stone, a granite figure near Ellie, determination hardening his features. "Thompson stirred up trouble, Sheriff," Ellie stated, her voice firm despite the tremor Jed noticed in her hands. Jedediah persuaded them to reconsider. Brody's eyes widened. Stone's reputation preceded him, a tapestry woven with whispers in smoky saloons, tales of a man best left undisturbed. "Thompson, you say?" Brody mumbled, dabbing at his brow. "That's concerning." He scanned the horizon, half expecting the gang's return. "Anyone hurt?" "A few bruised feelings, Sheriff," Jed offered, his tone a low rumble. He offered no further details, and Brody, sensing the coiled danger within Stone, wisely refrained from probing. On a distant ridge, gilded by the descending sun, Snake Thompson halted his mount. Shadows elongated and twisted, rendering him even more sinister. He spat a dark wad into the parched earth, his gaze fixed on the unfolding drama. He recognized the sheriff, a doddering fool more interested in siestas than justice. But it was Stone who commanded his full attention. Stone. He spat, the name a bitter taste on his tongue. He recalled the campfire stories, the grim folklore surrounding Jedediah Stone, the angel of retribution, a phantom hand quicker than any serpent, deadly accurate. He'd dismissed them as drunken boasts. Yet, seeing Stone protecting the girl, a seed of doubt sprouted in his mind. Urging his horse closer to the precipice, he murmured, "I know your game, Stone. You can't hide forever." He turned to his men, their faces masks of anticipation. "Let's go," he commanded, his voice a chillingly calm promise. "We'll be back. And next time, the rules change." Back in town, the air remained charged. After a few perfunctory inquiries, Sheriff Brody announced his intention to reason with Thompson, a declaration more akin to a prayer than a threat. He retreated to his buggy, his posture reflecting defeat. As the buggy bounced away, Ellie faced Jed, worry darkening her eyes. "Thank you, Jedediah," she murmured. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," he responded, his voice clipped. He averted his gaze, unable to meet her scrutiny. He struggled to decipher his own motivations. Years spent burying his violent past, seeking solace in solitude, had been shattered by the fear in Ellie's gaze, the menace in Thompson's posture. Dormant instincts had clawed their way to the surface, unwelcome specters of his former self. "He knows you, doesn't he?" Ellie probed, her voice a bare whisper. Jed sighed, raking a hand through his thinning hair. "Thompson and our paths crossed some time ago," he admitted, a shadow of regret clouding his eyes. "Before I came here. Before I tried to evolve." "What happened?" she pressed, seeking clarity in his troubled expression. He hesitated, loath to exhume the ghosts of his past. "It's irrelevant," he finally said. "It's over. Finished." But he knew it wasn't. He felt it in his core, a chilling premonition coiling in his gut. Thompson wouldn't relinquish his vendetta. Like a viper in waiting, he would strike when least expected. And Jed knew, with unwavering dread, that Thompson's return would unleash the darkness he'd fought so hard to contain. Later that night, stars glittered across the velvet canvas of the sky as Jed stood on Ellie's porch. The town's clamor had faded, yielding to the serenade of crickets and the distant cry of a coyote. Through the window, he saw Ellie bathed in lamplight, absorbed in a book, a furrow creasing her brow. He longed to confide in her, to shield her from the coming storm. But he couldn't risk it. His presence, his history, would only invite danger. He was a storm cloud, amassing on the horizon, and she, a sunflower, eternally reaching for the light. He could not allow his darkness to tarnish her radiance. He turned and retreated into the sheltering shadows. He had a reckoning to face, a penance to pay, and he knew that safeguarding Ellie meant confronting his demons, embracing the man he had desperately tried to escape. He could only hope he could do so without destroying everything, and everyone he held dear. Snake Thompson's words reverberated in the night, a chilling vow that settled like ice in Jed's veins. Thompson wouldn't simply vanish. He was a festering sore, a constant reminder of the life Jed had fought to escape, a life he feared he would be forced to resurrect. Scars and confessions, the last rays of the sun stretched gaunt shadows across the porch as Ellie tended the gash above Jed's brow with a dampened cloth. A heavy stillness hung in the air, thick with earth and honeysuckle, a fragrant mask over the raw tension between them. Jed sat rigid, jaw tight, avoiding her gaze as if it burned. Each featherlight press of the cool linen was a silent accusation of her steadfast compassion against the backdrop of his own perceived worthlessness. "Easy," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the evening chorus of crickets. He recoiled slightly. "I'm not going to hurt you, Jedediah." A grunt was his only reply, somewhere between assent and defiance. He loathed this vulnerability, the unwanted solace, the unwelcome stirring of embers he'd believed extinguished long ago. A hazard, a damaged thing. He couldn't fathom why she bothered, nursing him like a foundling. "Why, Ellie?" he finally ground out, the question rusty with disuse. Her hands stilled, hovering. Her eyes, like sun-warmed amber, locked with his, revealing an ocean of feeling he desperately wanted to escape. Was it pity he glimpsed? Or worse, a hint of wounded disappointment? Because you're injured, she answered simply, and because it's what I should do. A harsh, mirthless sound escaped him. The right thing? Is that your justification? Mending a killer is the right thing. Her expression remained unchanged, a serene lake reflecting none of his inner storm. I don't believe you're a killer, Jedediah, she stated, her tone unwavering. Not anymore. He averted his gaze, the implied absolution a painful sting. Bloodstains like his ran deep, and spectres of the past never truly slept. He shuffled on the swing, its rhythmic groan a somber accompaniment to the chaos within. Do you even know me, Ellie? His voice was a low growl. Do you recall why I left? She sighed, depositing the cloth in the nearby basin. I remember you were consumed by anger, she responded, choosing each word with care. Furious at the world, furious at yourself. I remember you were suffering. Suffering? He gave a short, humorless bark of laughter. Suffering barely scratches the surface. I was corrupt, through and through. His eyes finally met hers, revealing an abyss of pain. Do you imagine I wanted to abandon you, Ellie? To leave this town? I was protecting you from myself. Protecting me? She echoed, brows knit together. By vanishing? By leaving me without a single word? What other choice did I have? He surged to his feet, pacing the confines of the porch. The planks protested under his weight, a stark echo of the burden he carried. I was a danger, a walking catastrophe. My father, he was no saint. He initiated me into horrors no boy should ever witness. Violence flowed in my veins, Ellie. It was my only inheritance. He paused, raking a hand through his disheveled hair. Memories surged, vivid and brutal. The sulphurous tang of gunpowder, the shrieks of the dying, the vacant eyes of the fallen. He'd strive to bury it all, to flee the darkness that clung to him like a second skin, but it was ever present, biding its time. I fell in with a brutal crowd after I left, he continued, his voice a thread. Perpetrated acts I can never atone for, actions that would make you recoil from me in disgust. I attempted to reinvent myself, to ascend, but it was futile. The darkness always reclaims its own. Ellie remained seated, observing him with a blend of worry and hesitant empathy. She offered no interruptions, no empty reassurances, her mere presence a steadying force in the tempest raging inside him. I witnessed too much, he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. I committed unforgivable acts. I still see their faces, Ellie, every damn night, their eyes forever accusing. He shuddered, wrapping his arms around himself, as if battling a bone-deep chill. That's why I fled, he confessed, at last meeting her gaze. That's why I returned here, seeking some semblance of peace, a way to outrun the shadows. But they trailed me, Ellie. They always do. He stared out at the approaching night, his silhouette a stark outline against the fading light. And now, they threatened to taint you. Ellie rose, her movements fluid and deliberate. She approached him, halting mere inches away. He felt her warmth, inhaled the delicate fragrance of lavender that always permeated her clothes. He yearned to reach out, to pull her close, to lose himself in her embrace, but he resisted the impulse. He was unworthy of her comfort. Jedediah, she stated, her voice gentle yet firm. You can't perpetually run from your past. You must confront it. And you don't have to do it alone. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and discerned the unwavering conviction in her gaze. The belief that even a man as tarnished as he could still attain absolution. It was a dangerous thing, that unwavering hope. It kindled desires he could not fulfill, things he did not merit. "Don't you understand, Ellie?" he pleaded, his voice breaking. "I'm poison. I'll only drag you down into the abyss with me." She reached out, her hand gently caressing his cheek. Her touch was electrifying, igniting an ember he'd convinced himself was long dead. "Then we'll confront it together," she vowed, her eyes luminous with steadfast determination. "We'll face it together, Jedediah, and we'll forge a path through." He closed his eyes, letting her touch anchor him. He knew it was a fool's hope. He knew the darkness would eventually engulf him, and her alongside him. But in that fleeting moment, with her hand on his face and her unwavering conviction shining in her eyes, he permitted himself to believe, if only for a heartbeat, that perhaps, just perhaps, redemption was within his reach. A possibility for reconciliation, an opportunity for love, a reason to persevere. He opened his eyes, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he saw not the suffocating darkness of his past, but a faint glimmer of promise in the warm, honeyed depths of Ellie's eyes. But he knew that to shield her, he would have to confront the darkness he had fought to suppress. He would have to become the monster he once was, the fiend he never wanted to be again, and that thought terrified him beyond measure. Faith and forgiveness. The hush was a tangible thing, a dense blanket woven with the snap and hiss of burning wood. Jed studied Ellie, the firelight painting her irises with flickering gold, a warmth he hadn't earned. He'd exposed his darkness, anticipated her recoil, yet she stood her ground, immovable as granite. Now, the stage belonged to her. A sigh escaped her lips, light as dandelion fluff, yet burdened with years untold. "You believe you're alone in bearing wounds, Jedediah?" Her tone was gentle, yet held an unyielding core. "That you're the only one acquainted with demons?" She moved to the window, her gaze drawn to the inky canvas of the street. Moonlight silvered the rooftops, transforming the town into a study in gray scale. "When you vanished," she began, her voice a fragile thread, "it wasn't merely farewell. It was an evisceration, like ripping a vital page from my very essence. Everything felt fractured." She paused, her breath hitching. "I seethed. I ached. I floundered. I implored, Jed. I begged for your return, for understanding. Above all, I begged for respite from the torment." Turning, her eyes met his, devoid of accusation, brimming only with a profound melancholy. "Faith doesn't abolish suffering, Jed. It empowers you to shoulder it. Offers the solace that dawn will eventually break." She swept a hand through her tresses, a gesture revealing a rawness previously unseen. "I erected barricades, Jed, around my soul, a fortress of habit, of obligation, of carefully measured distance. It felt simpler, safer." She stirred the embers in the hearth, releasing a shower of sparks that spiraled into the chimney's throat. "Society anticipated a marriage for me, roots planted, the exemplary vicar's daughter. I even flirted with the prospect briefly. It seemed the prescribed path. Did you?" Jed's question emerged as a hoarse croak. Ellie shook her head. "No, I couldn't bring myself to it. Every suitor who presented himself, I saw your countenance, heard your inflections, felt the hollowness. It wasn't fair to them. It wasn't fair to myself." She regarded him, her expression a closed book. "You carved out a void, Jed. one that proved impossible to fill. He swallowed, the taste of remorse acrid on his tongue. Ellie, I am deeply sorry. I never intended to inflict such pain. I know, she murmured. That's the cruel irony. Your intentions were noble. You believed you were acting in my best interest, shielding me from your inherent darkness. And wasn't I correct? He countered, a sharp edge to his voice. Look at the wreckage I've become, Ellie. Look at the monster within. I am looking, Jedediah, she stated, her volume amplifying slightly. I see a man, forged in the crucible of hardship. A man who has stumbled, undeniably, but a man also imbued with the capacity for profound benevolence. You are not a monster, Jed. You are a man. A flawed, fragmented man, perhaps, but a man nonetheless. Stepping closer, her gaze bored into his. Do you honestly believe I haven't witnessed the tenderness in your gaze when you interact with the town's children? The unsolicited aid you offered Mrs. Henderson when her wagon faltered? The clandestine acts of compassion you attempt to conceal? Your heart betrays you, Jed. It shines through, regardless of your resistance. Jed averted his gaze, unable to sustain her scrutiny. Those actions don't absolve my transgressions. No, Ellie conceded. They don't, but they affirm the enduring flicker of good within you. They offer a glimmer of hope. Reaching out, she gently touched his forearm, her fingertips radiating warmth. I offer no promises of ease, Jed, for either of us. There will be sorrow and uncertainty, and potentially even further pain. Yet, I harbor a belief I believe we can confront it together. If you will allow me. His gaze dropped to her hand resting on his arm, then ascended to meet her eyes. He perceived not pity, not condemnation, but authentic hope, a hope that mirrored the nascent ember within his own heart, a hope he had prematurely mourned. Why, Ellie, he whispered, his voice barely audible, why would you extend such an offer? Given the totality of my actions, the ordeal I have subjected you to. A melancholy, knowing smile graced her lips. Because I love you, Jedediah Stone, and because I champion the transformative power of absolution, not solely for you, but also for myself. She paused, her gaze unwavering. However, above all else, Jeddah, I yearn for validation. I need assurance that my faith in the man I cherished all those years ago remains justified, that he still resides within you, dormant but not extinguished. The weight of her declaration settled upon him, crushing yet strangely liberating. He had existed for so long under the conviction of his irredeemability, fated to navigate a solitary existence in the abyss. Yet here she stood, extending a hand, a beacon, an opportunity, at something he had deemed unattainable. He yearned to grasp it. He desperately desired to. But fear restrained him, the dread of dragging her into his descent, of staining her purity with his darkness. Ellie, he began, his voice choked with emotion. I harbor doubts about my capacity to embody the man you envision. Then simply aspire to be the man you desire to be, Jed, she countered, gently squeezing his arm. That is my only plea. Silence descended once more, yet this time it carried a different timbre. It was a silence laden with unspoken sentiments, with tentative hope, with the fragile promise of a future yet unwritten. The fire crackled with renewed vigor, casting playful shadows upon the walls, as Jedediah Stone gazed into the eyes of the woman he loved and, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, permitted himself to entertain awe. The possibility, perhaps, just perhaps, redemption lay within his reach. Yet the shadows stretching from beyond were creeping longer, and Jed knew their reprieve was nearly over. He could feel the storm gathering force, and knew there was nowhere left to hide. He would meet it head-on, for Ellie, even if it meant facing his own damnation. Night of the Outlaws, a sliver of moon, like chipped enamel in the pitch-black sky, barely illuminated redemption as Snake Thompson's gang rode in. Whirlwinds of dust spun around their horses, mirroring the turmoil in their guts. They weren't coming as guests, but as predators returning to a well-worn den. Shutters clamped down on the saloon windows, usually wide open, and meager light spilled from other windows, sketching long, gaunt shadows across the desolate street. Atop midnight, his ebony stallion, Snake, scanned the scene, his gaze like polished coal. A predatory curve etched itself onto his lips. "Looks like they had a hunch we were comin', boys," he rumbled, the words a low growl carried on the breeze. "Pity for them, knowin' it's comin' ain't the same as standin' ready." The gang, a ragtag assemblage of scoundrels, rustled in their saddles, the metallic shink of their weaponry a jarring note against the town's silence. There was Razor Ray, a lean gunslinger known for his hair-trigger reflexes and volatile temper. Dutch Henry, a mountainous thug whose brawn was only exceeded by his hunger for bloodshed, and Whisper Jones, a wraith of a man famed for his deadly accuracy and unnerving quiet. They convened in the alley behind the bank, the air thick with the stink of stale beer and broken dreams. Dismounting, the leather of Snake's saddle groaned under his weight. He unfurled a worn map on a discarded crate, the faint moonlight reflecting on its faded lines. "All right, huddle up," he barked, his voice leaving no room for debate. "The play's the same as rehearsed. Dutch, Razor, you two hit the back. Jones, you watch the front. The vault's mine." Razor Ray spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt, eager for the action. "What about the townsfolk? Any pushback?" Snake's grin widened, revealing teeth stained the color of old ivory. "We're here to stir up trouble, aren't we? But keep it neat. We ain't looking for a fight unless they want one." He paused, letting the threat hang in the air like cordite. "Just remember, the gold's the main event. Anything else that's just a distraction." Dutch Henry cracked his knuckles, a sound like snapping twigs. "Distraction," he echoed, his voice a guttural purr. "I like that." Whisper Jones stood mute, his eyes sweeping the rooftops, ever watchful. His quiet was more chilling than any boast he was. The spectre in their operation, relishing the hunt more than the kill. Snake folded the map, his movements economical and precise. "Don't forget," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "We get in, we get out, and we leave 'em rememberin' the name. Snake Thompson." He paused, his dark gaze sweeping across his crew. "Let's remind redemption what real fear feels like." They slipped through the shadows like phantoms, each man absorbed in his role in the coming ordeal. Dutch and Razor flanked the bank, their footfalls softened by the thick dust. Jones claimed his position across the street, his rifle cradled in his arms, his gaze like shards of glacial ice. Snake stalked towards the front entrance, his hand hovering near the grip of his revolver. Adrenaline coursed through him, the familiar jolt of danger sharpening his senses. He booted the door inwards, hinges shrieking in protest, and entered the dimly illuminated bank. The night watchman, a frail old man named Abernathy, slumped in his chair, snoring softly. Snake smirked. This was shaping up to be easier than expected. He fired a shot into the ceiling. The report echoed through the bank, obliterating the silence and startling Abernathy awake. The old man blinked, his eyes widening in terror as he saw Snake Thompson standing before him, a gun in his fist and malice etched on his face. "Good evening, Mr. Abernathy," Snake drawled, his voice boozing false courtesy. "I hope you're enjoyin' your night," Abernathy stammered, his voice a shaky whisper. Snake, what do you want?" "What do you think I want, old-timer?" Snake sneered. "I want the gold. All of it. Now." Abernathy fumbled for the safe's combination, his hands trembling uncontrollably. Snake observed him with amusement, savoring the old man's dread. "Hurry it up, old man," he snarled, his voice turning hard. "I got all night." Outside, the town stirred. The gunshot had yanked the residents from slumber, and cautious faces peered from behind drawn curtains. Whisper Jones deterred them with a few Willamette shots, sending shards of wood splintering from window frames. Inside the bank, Abernathy finally threw open the vault. The heavy door swung open, revealing stacks of gold bars and bags overflowing with coins. Snake's eyes blazed at the sight of the treasure. "Well, well, well," he purred, his voice thick with greed. "Looks like redemption's been hidin' a little nest egg." He gestured to Dutch and Razor, who had just entered the bank. "Start loadin' it up, boys. Time's a-wastin'." As the outlaws began stuffing sacks with gold, Snake turned his attention back to Abernathy. "Now, Mr. Abernathy," he said, his tone growing menacing once more. "There's just one little thing." He produced a small, intricately carved box from his pocket. "I believe this is yours." Recognition flared in Abernathy's eyes. The box held his wife's wedding ring, a cherished keepsake stolen from his home months prior. "Where did you get that?" Abernathy demanded, his fear momentarily overshadowed by rage. Snake grinned, a cruel, pitiless expression. "Let's just say I have my sources." He paused, his eyes narrowing to slits. "But that ain't important. What is important is that you understand the consequences if you blab about this. You breathe a word to anyone, I'll be back, and next time, I won't be so generous." He tossed the box at Abernathy's feet. "Consider it a token," he said, his voice like frosted steel. "A reminder of what happens to those who cross Snake Thompson." With the gold loaded onto their mounts, Snake and his gang spurred their horses and fled redemption, leaving a town paralyzed with terror and a watchman haunted by the specter of their visit. The night of the outlaws had come and passed, leaving its mark on redemption, a stain that would linger for years to come. Preparing for war even before the dust devils kicked up by Snake Thompson's flight had fully dissipated, a cold premonition gripped Jedediah Stone. The robbery itself was a baan, bitter pill, but the brashness of it whispered of more to come. It was a gauntlet thrown down, a promise of return. Behind the general store, he found Abernathy sporting a spectacular shiner, his usual bluster replaced by mortified silence. "He'll be back, Abernathy," Jed warned, his voice a low rasp. "They always do." Abernathy hawked and spat. "What can we do, Stone? We're short on guns, short on grit." "Then we find some," Jed countered, his eyes flinty. "And we cultivate the grit." Moving through the town, he was a figure of grim resolve amidst widespread trepidation. Fear hung thick, a palpable weight in the air. He paused before the saloon, its swinging doors groaning in the breeze, each creak a stark reminder of their vulnerability. Inside, the atmosphere was somber, a few souls huddled over weak whiskey. "Listen up," Jed's voice cracked through the hushed anxiety, silencing the murmur. Every gaze fixed on him, a blend of dread and reluctant anticipation swirling within. Thompson's not done with us. Next time, he won't be so charitable. A dry cough punctuated the silence. What are you saying, Stone? Just offer up the town on a platter? Jed's fist slammed into the bar, the wood resonating with the force of his conviction. I'm saying we fight. Turn this town into a porcupine he won't want to touch. He surveyed the room, seeking a spark of defiance. The silence stretched, taut as a wire, before Silas, a weathered codger, slowly raised a trembling hand. Too damn old to run, he croaked, a surprising firmness in his tone. Might as well go down swinging. Hesitant hands soon followed, gaining momentum with each passing moment. The ember had been kindled. Good, Jed affirmed, a hard satisfaction etching his face. First, the perimeter. He rattled off orders, his voice sharp and purposeful, his movements economical. Wagons overturned at the north and south approaches. Every heavy object we can find becomes a barricade. Reinforce those windows along Main Street. He found Ellie at the church, tending to a child's scraped knee. Though pale, her eyes reflected a steadfast spirit. Jedediah, she greeted him, her voice soft yet resolute. What's happening? He'll be back, Ellie, Jed responded, his voice softening. I won't let him touch you. I'm not afraid, she declared, her chin lifting slightly. But these folks are. They need hope, Jedediah. They need someone to believe in. Her words struck him with the force of revelation. He'd long considered himself incapable of offering solace, of living up to the man she believed him to be. But gazing into her unwavering eyes, he felt a long dormant ember ignite a sense of purpose, of responsibility. I'll do all I can, he vowed, his voice rough with emotion. I know you will, Ellie replied, her smile a sunrise in the gathering gloom. The transformation of redemption commenced. Wagons toppled, forming crude obstacles. Men fortified windows with heavy planks, transforming buildings into fortified positions. Women gathered stones and glass shards, fashioning makeshift weapons. The fear remained, but now it was tempered by a gritty determination. Jed moved among them, a human dynamo, directing, instructing, galvanizing. He unearthed forgotten rifles in dusty attics, their metal marred by rust and neglectoppery, teaching townsfolk how to restore and load them. He established patrols, designating sectors and duties. He was a leader reborn from the ashes of his past. As twilight descended, painting long shadows across the evolving stronghold, Jed stood atop the saloon, surveying the scene. The town was changed, scarred and fortified, throbbing with fierce resolve. He observed Ellie circulating among the people, offering comfort and encouragement, her presence a soothing balm amidst the mounting tension. He knew Thompson would return. The knowledge was etched in his very bones. And when he did, he would encounter a town prepared to defend itself, a town ready to protect its own. And he would find Jedediah Stone, standing as a bulwark between him and the woman he had grown to love, prepared to unleash the darkness he had fought so diligently to contain. The prospect both terrified and electrified him. He was a weapon, honed by years of violence and regret. And now, that weapon would be unsheathed, not for vengeance, but for love, for redemption's sake, courage in the face of fear. The sun's final streamers painted redemptions, hastily erected barricades in hues of fading apricot, and deepened the encroaching shadows. A palpable buzz. Tension permeated the air. thick with the mingled scents of pine and burning wood. Jedediah Stone, a silhouette against the dying light, scanned the horizon. A rifle nestled in his arms, a stark figure embodying grim resolve against the approaching threat. Ellie Monroe approached, her footfalls muted on the parched earth. Halting beside him, her nearness radiated a comforting warmth, a welcome counterpoint to the chill that had long settled in his spirit. She offered no words, her presence a silent solace. He cast a fleeting glance her way, his expression a mask. "You shouldn't linger here, Ellie," he rasped, his voice a low growl against the rising wind's lament. "This night will be long and hard." "I'm aware," she countered, her tone firm, despite the tremor he sensed beneath the surface. He saw it in the clenching of her hands, the subtle hardening of her jawline. "But I won't abandon my home, or its people." He averted his gaze, his jaw tight. Her presence was unwanted, especially now, on the precipice of the storm. He couldn't bear the thought of her witnessing the darkness he struggled to contain, the violence he'd fought to suppress. "You misunderstand what's coming," he warned, his voice edged with steel. "Thompson. He's unlike anyone you can imagine." Ellie reached out, her fingers brushing his forearm. The simple touch sent a visceral shiver through him, a painful reminder of the tenderness he'd almost allowed to wither. "I may not know him," she declared, her gaze locked on his, "but I know you, Jedediah. I know your capabilities." He recoiled, flinching from her touch. "Don't," he snapped, his voice sharp. "Don't idealize me, Ellie. I'm not the man you believe me to be." "I perceive the man you're striving to become," she insisted, her voice ringing with conviction. "The man standing guard, protecting this town, protecting me. That's the man I choose to embrace." He met her gaze, truly seeing the unshakable faith reflected there. It was a belief he didn't merit, a conviction that unnerved him more than any firefight. He was fractured, haunted by specters of the past, yet she looked upon him as something more. "Why?" he breathed, his voice barely audible. "Why maintain this faith after everything?" Ellie drew nearer, her voice softening to a gentle murmur. "Because I see the good within you, Jedediah," she revealed. "Perhaps buried deep, but undeniably present. And I believe that even the most shadowed souls can grasp redemption." Her words lingered, a fragile hope against the backdrop of imminent conflict. He longed to believe her, yearned for the possibility of escape from his past. Yet the dread remained, the chilling fear that he would only drag her down, that his darkness would extinguish her light. A figure emerged from the gloom, a youth named Billy, his face drained of color with terror. "They're coming," he stammered, his voice trembling like a leaf. "I saw them, cresting the ridge. A multitude of them, Mr. Stone." Jedediah's eyes narrowed, his gaze hardening into cold determination. The discourse was over. The moment of reckoning had arrived. He inhaled deeply, casting aside his doubts, his fears, his history. He had a town to safeguard, a woman to defend. He turned towards Ellie, his expression resolute. "Take shelter," he commanded, his voice cutting through the tension. "Seek refuge in the saloon. Stay there." Ellie shook her head, her voice firm. "I will not cower," she stated. "I will remain here, by your side." He began to protest, but saw the unwavering resolve blazing in her eyes, a mirror of his own tenacity. He conceded, realizing resistance was futile, and in that instant he acknowledged that he didn't want to. Her valor was a beacon, a spark in the encroaching night, a constant reminder of what he was fighting for. He offered a curt nod, his lips forming a grim line. Very well. He relented. But stay behind me, and should the worst occur, you run. Do you understand? Ellie nodded, her hand gripping his arm with fierce determination. I understand, she affirmed, but I will not flee. Not from this. Not from you. Jedediah addressed the townsfolk huddled behind the barricades, their faces etched with anxiety. He projected his voice, his words resonating with unwavering resolve amidst the gathering gloom. They have arrived, he announced. They come to seize what belongs to us. But we will not surrender. We will defend our ground. We will fight for our homes, for our families, for redemption itself. We will demonstrate what mettle we possess. A ripple of assent spread through the crowd, a nascent spark of defiance igniting in their eyes. Ellie stepped forward, her aura radiating serenity and strength. We are not a town of cowards, she declared, her voice ringing with clarity. We are a community. We are resilient. And we will not be broken. Her words galvanized the crowd, filling them with a renewed sense of purpose. They straightened their postures, tightened their grips on their weapons, and braced themselves to confront the impending storm. Jedediah gazed upon Ellie, his heart swelling with gratitude and admiration. She was a force of nature, a lighthouse of hope in a world consumed by shadow. He knew the impending clash would be savage, that many would not endure. But he also knew they were not alone. They had each other. They had their unwavering grit. And they had Ellie, the preacher's daughter who had instilled in them a reason to fight, a reason to believe in the prospect of absolution. The first shots shattered the silence, heralding the commencement of a long, sanguinary night. Jedediah Stone raised his rifle, his eyes burning with a fierce, unwavering commitment. He was prepared. He was prepared to battle. He was prepared to perish, if need be. But he would not permit Snake Thompson to claim redemption. Not while life remained in him, and not while Ellie stood by his side, her courage illuminating the face of fear. Redemption under fire, the morning's hush shattered with a single gunshot, a violent rip to the peace. Above Abernathy's Mercantile, the wooden sign exploded in a spray of splinters, scattering across the parched earth. The signal. Hell descended. From the church belfry, Jedediah Stone watched the riders crest the hill, a churning wave of dust and menace. Snake Thompson, his face a road map of old, scars beneath a dark Stetson, spearheaded the assault. Jed's fingers tightened around his rifle, the familiar chill a stark contrast to the tremor in his grip. He'd pleaded with Ellie, urged her to flee the inevitable storm, but she'd remained steadfast, her eyes reflecting a conviction he couldn't grasp, didn't warrant. Gunfire erupted, a deafening chorus. Bullets whizzed past Jed, each a stinging reminder of his past. He squeezed the trigger, a rider collapsing from his mount. The rifle's lever snicked, ejecting the spent casing movements ingrained by years of brutality he'd fought to suppress. Below, the townsfolk met the onslaught with surprising grit. Old man, Hemlock, usually pruning roses, now wielded a shotgun behind a barricade of overturned wagons. Even timid Sarah Miller, her face pale but resolute, fed rifles to the defenders. A thunderous boom shook the saloon, flames greedily devouring the building's front. Jed cursed. Dynamite. Thompson's men were escalating. He needed to get into the fray, but his high ground was vital. His gaze swept the street, desperately searching for Ellie. He spotted her near the doctor's, tending to a wounded boy. A cold fist clenched around his heart. He couldn't let her get hurt. Another rider fell to his shot, then another. Like a plague of locusts, the attackers swarmed into town. Jed knew the odds were stacked against them, but Redemption's residents fought with a ferocity born of desperation, their courage blazing in their eyes. A slug slammed into the bell beside him, the jarring clang vibrating through his bones. He ducked, momentarily disoriented by the debris. When he looked again, Thompson had dismounted, his gaze locked on the church. He was coming for him. Jed clattered down the bell tower stairs, his boots thudding against the wood, burst into the church. The sanctuary transformed into a makeshift infirmary. Ellie rushed to him, her hands stained crimson, her face etched with worry. "Jed," she exclaimed, "you have to leave. This isn't your battle." He grasped her shoulders, his eyes burning with intensity. "This is my battle, Ellie. I brought this to your doorstep. I'm done running." "But—" "No buts," he interrupted. "I need you to stay here. Keep these people safe. Can you do that?" Her eyes locked with his, fear yielding to steel. "Yes," she said, resolute. He kissed her quickly, a fleeting warmth in the heart of the storm. "I'll be back," he promised, knowing it might be a lie. He exploded from the church and into the street, his rifle raised. Thompson stood waiting, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Well, well, Jedediah Stone," Thompson drawled. "Fancy meeting you here. Word was you'd gone soft." "You heard wrong, Snake," Jed retorted, his voice a low growl. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, Stone. Just hand over what we want, and we'll ride. If you want to leave this town, you'll have to go through me." Thompson's laugh was a rasping, unpleasant sound. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." He drew his pistol, the steel winking in the light. Jed raised his rifle, his finger edging towards the trigger. Time seemed to stretch, the sounds of the battle fading into a distant drone. It was just them, facing each crack. Other in the dust. Their shared history a mire of violence and betrayal. Before either could move, a figure darted between them. Ellie. "Stop!" she cried, her voice cutting through the din. "This has to end." Thompson's eyes narrowed, assessing her. "Get out of the way, preacher's daughter. This is man's business." "It doesn't have to be," she pleaded. "There's enough bloodshed. Can't we find a different way?" Thompson scoffed. "There is no other way. This is how it is. The strong take what they want." He raised his pistol, aiming at Jed once more. But before he could fire, Ellie lunged in front of Jed, shielding him. "No!" Jed roared, shoving her aside. The bullet, intended for him, ripped through the air and slammed into Thompson's chest. He stumbled back, disbelief etched on his face, and collapsed. A stunned silence descended. The gunfire faltered, leaving only the crackling fire and the ragged breaths of the survivors. Everyone stared at Thompson's prone form, the gravity of the moment sinking in. Jed rushed to the Ellie, his hands shaking as he checked her for injuries. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice thick with dread. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm fine," she said. "But what have you done?" Thompson's men, momentarily paralyzed by their leader's fall, began to regroup. Jed knew this wasn't finished. They would seek vengeance. He straightened, his gaze hardening. "It's not over," he said, his voice a dangerous undertone. "But it will be." He looked at Ellie, his eyes reflecting a turbulent mix of love and regret. "Stay here," he pleaded. He turned to face Thompson's men, rifle raised, the embodiment of the violence he had desperately tried to leave behind. But now, he wasn't fighting for survival. He was fighting for redemption. He was fighting for Ellie. He was fighting for a future he was unsure he deserved, but was willing to die to protect. The battle surged back to life with renewed fury. A gunfighter's resolve, the shotgun's blast still rang in Jedediah's skull, the sharp tang of burnt powder clinging to the air. Snake Thompson lay, motionless, a pathetic mockery of the swaggering outlaw he'd been seconds ago. Yet reflection was a luxury he couldn't afford, nor could he indulge the guilt that clawed at him. Thompson's men, momentarily stunned, erupted anew. Their fury unleashed, they charged, a human wave of rage brandishing rifles and revolvers, their faces twisted masks of animosity. Jedediah, moving with surprising agility, became a blur of purposeful motion. He tossed aside the spent shotgun, his Colt Peacemaker appearing in his hand as if by magic. The pistol recoiled, spitting hot lead. A bandit clutched his bloodied chest and collapsed. Another shrieked as a slug ripped through his forearm. He wasn't aiming for kill shots. Every time. A crippling wound, a glancing blow, whatever it took to slow their advance, to buy precious seconds. Not seeking annihilation, he sought only to safeguard redemption, to shield Ellie. Ellie. He risked a furtive glance her way. She stood transfixed near the church, her face ashen yet resolute, her eyes reflecting a brew of terror. And could it be admiration? Impossible. Not for this carnage. Ellie, inside, he bellowed, his voice strained against the din. She remained rooted to the spot. Stubborn woman. A bullet buzzed past his head, dragging him back to the present. He dove behind an overturned wagon, using its bulk as a shield while he reloaded. The click of the cylinder echoed in the sudden hush. Another quick peek. The townsfolk were fleeing, seeking sanctuary within their homes, their features pinched with stark terror. The conflict was closing in on the church, on Ellie. Unacceptable. He exploded from behind the wagon, firing on the move. He threaded the chaos, a grim specter in a dust-caked coat. Each shot found its mark, each movement precise. No longer the broken wanderer who had limped into redemption searching for oblivion. He was a gunslinger reborn, a guardian. He spotted one of Thompson's thugs peel off from the main assault, heading directly for Ellie. A cruel leer stretched across the man's face. Jedediah's blood iced over. "No!" he roared, his voice a guttural cry of raw fury. He sprinted toward them, heedless of the bullets tearing the air around him. He moved with uncanny speed, propelled by adrenaline and desperate protectiveness. His shot caught the outlaw square in the shoulder, sending him reeling. The misstep afforded Jedediah the time he craved. He reached Ellie, shoving her roughly behind him. "Get inside, now," he snapped, his voice tight with urgency. No arguments. Go. This time she obeyed, vanishing into the church's shadowed doorway. He pivoted to face the remaining attackers, his gaze burning with cold intensity. The fight raged on, a macabre dance of lead and desperation. Jedediah darted from cover to cover, systematically eliminating the threats. He felt detached, devoid of remorse or satisfaction, only a steely resolve to endure, to defend. Sheriff Brody materialized from the saloon, a rifle held firm, followed by a handful of townspeople. They were tentative, their faces pale, yet they had come. They were fighting back, offering resistance. The momentum shifted. The outlaws, demoralized by Thompson's demise and this unexpected defiance, began to crumble. Their assault became ragged, their aim erratic. Some broke ranks and scrambled toward their horses, desperate for escape. Jedediah pressed his advantage, driving them back, purging them from redemption. He relented only when the last outlaw had vanished over the horizon, leaving behind a swathe of dust and carnage. Silence descended upon the town, punctuated by the occasional sob or cough. The air hung thick with the stench of gunpowder and fear. Jedediah stood in the middle of the street, his chest rising and falling heavily, his gun still smoldering in his grip. He surveyed the devastation, the shattered windows and blood-splattered thoroughfare. Had he salvaged redemption, or cursed it? He saw Ellie emerge from the church, her face wan but her eyes alight with relief. She rushed toward him, oblivious to the grime and gore that coated him. "Jedediah," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Are you hurt?" He looked at her unshakable faith, her boundless empathy. He was unworthy of her concern, her kindness. He was a monster cloaked in man's skin. "I'm all right," he rasped. He holstered his weapon, avoiding her gaze. "Thank you," she breathed, tentatively reaching out to touch his arm. "You saved us all." He recoiled from her touch, pulling away. "I just did what was necessary." "No," she countered, shaking her head. "You did more than that. You shielded us. You demonstrated that you care." He remained silent, grappling with her words. He cared? Yes, he cared about her. But did that transform him? Did it absolve him of the darkness he carried? The townsfolk cautiously emerged from their homes, their expressions a mix of gratitude and unease. They regarded Jedediah with newfound respect, mingled with apprehension. They had witnessed the depths of his capabilities, the shadow that lurked beneath his impassive exterior. Sheriff Brody approached him, his face etched with concern. "Stone," he began. "Words can't express my gratitude. You saved this town." "Merely doing my part," Jedediah replied, his voice devoid of inflection. "All the same, you'll have to answer for Thompson," Brody stated, his gaze unwavering. "I witnessed it, Stone. I saw you kill him." Jedediah nodded, accepting his fate. He knew he could never truly outrun his past. He was prepared to bear the burden of his choices. Perhaps this was his atonement, his path to redemption. Yet, as he looked at Ellie, at the ember of hope that still flickered within her gaze, he wondered if perhaps, just perhaps, there remained a chance for him. A chance at a future. A chance at love. A chance to finally cast off the chains of his past. But that was a distant prospect. He looked at Ellie, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. He knew, with a conviction that resonated deep within his soul, that he would continue to fight for her, for redemption, because now he possessed something worth defending. He possessed a reason to live. Faith as a shield, the air tasted of birch powder and metallic tang, a grim perfume clinging to everything. Lead wasps buzzed, stirring miniature cyclones of dust along Main Street. Jedediah, a tempest of controlled motion, blurred through the fray, each move a measured strike against the outlaw incursion. Yet, the struggle was far from won. In the rear of the general store, transformed into a makeshift triage, Ellie Monroe knelt beside a farmer, his complexion ashen, marred by crimson streaks. The sharp bite of medicinal spirits fought with the lingering stench of gunfire. Her hands, normally crafting intricate needlepoint or arranging posies, were now slicked with gore as she meticulously cleansed and bound the man's wound. A deep crease etched her brow, her lips moving in a silent benediction. "Hush now, Mr. Abernathy," she soothed, her voice a calming melody amidst the discord. "You'll mend. Just stay with me." Abernathy groaned, his eyelids fluttering. Ellie, the others? Jedediah's bought us time, she reassured him, offering the ghost of a smile. He's seen to things. She left the details unsaid. The distant echoes of combat painted the picture vividly. Ellie knew Jedediah carried scars unseen, etched by experiences beyond her grasp. But she glimpsed, too, the potential that still resided within the man she always believed he could be. The infirmary door slammed inward as young Billy, the blacksmith's boy, stumbled in, cradling a gushing arm. "Miss Ellie, they're near out of lead." Ellie's gaze sharpened, but her voice held steady. "The crates are in the back, Billy. Fetch them quick. Then get that arm seen to." As Billy hobbled away, Ellie straightened, wiping her hands on the stained fabric of her apron. She moved with a resolve that belied her soft nature. Daughter of the parson, yes, but also a woman of fortitude, of unshakable conviction, and unwavering grit. She located the ammunition boxes stacked against the wall, their wooden surfaces raw from rough handling. Hauling one up, she swayed for a moment under the load, but persevered, dragging it towards the front. The sounds of battle crescendos intensified. Beyond the doorway, Jedediah was an unleashed force, his colt peacemakers barking death. He danced through the chaos with an almost unnatural agility, evading projectiles and answering in kind with chilling efficiency. His fight was for absolution, for Ellie, for a future he dared not believe was his. Abruptly, a figure emerged from the shadowed alleyway, leveling a rifle at Jedediah's unsuspecting back. Ellie's breath hitched, a cold dread seizing her. Without hesitation, she snatched a Winchester from the gun rack, shouldered it, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard against her, the blast echoing in the confined space. The would-be assassin collapsed, his weapon clattering beside him. Ellie lowered the rifle, a tremor in her grip, but her gaze remained unwavering. She'd never fired a gun in anger before, but for those she held dear, she wouldn't hesitate again. She reloaded, her movement surprisingly fluid. Not a gunslinger, but adaptable. A survivor. Billy returned, his arm swathed in bandages, his face still ashen. "Miss Ellie, what's needed?" "Ammunition to the men on the roof, Billy, and tell them to watch the blind corners." She indicated the crates. "Hustle now." As Billy dashed off, Ellie resumed her ministrations to the wounded. Her presence was a beacon in the encroaching darkness, her faith a bulwark against despair. "Don't fret," she told a young woman weeping over her injured husband. "He's a strong one. He'll weather this. We all will." Her words, simple as they were, carried the force of unwavering belief. Ellie trusted in the power of spirit, in the inherent goodness of humankind, even in the face of overwhelming darkness. She trusted in Jedediah. Outside, the battle roared on. Jedediah fought with a savage intensity born of desperation, fueled by the burning need to safeguard Ellie, to defend redemption. He knew he was a flawed vessel, haunted by specters of his past, but he was determined to carve out a future with her. He flickered a glance at the general store, his eyes finding Ellie's through the grimy window. He watched her tending the wounded, her face aglow in the gentle lamplight. He witnessed her fortitude, her empathy, her unwavering spirit. And in that instant, he knew he wasn't simply fighting for redemption, he was fighting for her existence. He returned his focus to the fray, his movements now infused with an even greater resolve. He was a man steeped in shadow, a man grappling with inner demons. But he was also a man with a purpose now, a man with a reason to breathe. And he'd be damned if anyone stole it from him. Not anymore. Ellie watched him, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She understood the risks he courted, the demons he wrestled. but she also understood the strength of his soul, the depth of his devotion, and she believed in him. She believed in his chance. She closed her eyes, offering a silent prayer for his preservation, for the endurance of the town, for the triumph of light over encroaching evil. When she reopened them, her gaze was resolute, her spirit unwavering. She would not yield. She would not be broken. She was Ellie Monroe, and she stood ready to fight for her convictions. The battle raged onward, the fate of redemption suspended in the balance. But amidst the mayhem and the brutality, there flickered a spark of hope, a tenacious ember refusing to be snuffed out. And that spark, Ellie knew, was worth defending to her last breath. Cornered, the sharp tang of spent gunpowder clawed at Jedediah's throat. He surveyed the desolate street, his peacemaker a still warm extension of his hand. Ellie had been tending a wounded townsman by the mercantile just moments prior. A cold fist clenched his insides, an unwelcome echo from a history he desperately tried to bury. Then he spotted him. Cletus Snake Thompson, a reptile masquerading as a man, leaned against the hitching post, his oily grin a display of cruel intent. And pinned against him, her complexion ashen but her gaze steady, was Ellie. Snake's arm encircled her, a gleaming bowie knife a hair's breadth from her delicate skin. A glacial dread seeped into Jed's bones. This was the specter he'd fled, the constant terror now made flesh. His past had returned, not for him, but for her. "Well, well," Snake purred, his voice a gravelly menace that sliced through the sudden quiet. The remaining townsfolk, those still upright, stood frozen, weapons slack, faces masks of apprehension. "Looks like Jedediah Stone finally found something precious. Too bad it's so fragile." Jed's grip tightened on his revolver's handle, his knuckles bone white. He struggled to control his voice, to conceal the tempest raging within. "Release her, Thompson. This doesn't concern her." Snake's chuckle was a dry, grating sound that prickled Ellie's flesh. "Oh, but it does, Stone. You overlooked a crucial detail playing the hero. Everyone's got something they can't bear to lose. And you're risking more than most." He tightened his hold, and Ellie gasped. "Don't you dare, Snake," Jed pleaded, the words a bitter taste in his mouth. The sound of his own raw desperation sickened him, a painful echo of a time when his entreaties had met only tragedy. "Depends on you, Stone," Snake countered, his eyes gleaming with sadistic pleasure. "Drop the iron, all of it. Then maybe the pretty parson's daughter gets to walk away unscathed." Jed hesitated, every fiber screaming defiance. But Ellie's life hung in the balance. He met her gaze, wide with apprehension, yet illuminated by a spark of trust, of unwavering belief. She still had faith in him. Slowly, he lowered his Colt, letting it thud onto the dust. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the burden of years, he unbuckled his gun belt, relinquishing it to the dirt. The metallic echo reverberated through the tense silence. "Attaboy, Stone," Snake sneered. "Now, tell your little flock to follow suit." Jed turned to the townsfolk, his face a granite mask. "Do as he says. It's our only chance." Reluctantly, the remaining men and women relinquished their arms. Hope had deserted them. They were trapped, powerless. Snake's laugh was a triumphant peal, a sound that chilled the blood. "Now, Stone, let's discuss your contribution. See, redemption here holds some valuable assets. Assets I believe are rightfully mine." Jed stared at Snake, his gaze unwavering, a promise of retribution simmering beneath the surface. What is it you want? Everything, Snake declared, his eyes glittering with covetous hunger. The bank, the store, the land, everything. And you, Stone, are gonna facilitate the transfer. Ellie strained against Snake's grasp, her voice strained with defiance. Don't listen to him, Jedediah. Give him nothing. Snake pressed the blade closer, drawing a crimson bead of blood. Silence, girl. Jed's heart seized. He saw her terror, her pain, and knew he couldn't let her suffer. Not again. All right, Thompson, Jed conceded, his voice a low growl. You win. I'll do whatever you demand. Just release her. Snake's grin widened, radiating satisfaction. That's what I wanted to hear. But I ain't stupid, Stone. I don't trust you. You'll comply with every command, and the girl stays with me. Insurance, you see. Jed felt a cold dread creep through him. He couldn't allow that. He wouldn't. But he was ensnared, cornered as he had been so often. No, Jed whispered, the word barely audible. You can't. Oh, but I can, Stone, Snake countered, his eyes like chips of ice. And I will, unless you're keen to witness what this blade can truly accomplish. He increased the pressure, and a suppressed whimper escaped Ellie's lips. Jed's world constricted to that single point, the glinting steel, the precious life hanging precariously. The specters of his past failures rose to haunt him, accusing eyes and whispers of condemnation. He couldn't fail again. He wouldn't. He had to find a way out. For Ellie, for redemption, for a future he felt unworthy of. But how? He stood disarmed, outnumbered, outmaneuvered, like a wolf caught in a snare. This reckoning threatened to shatter everything he held dear. The weight of his past, the shadow of his future, the agonizing present all bore down on him. Yet, in the depths of despair, a spark ignited. He locked eyes with Ellie, seeing both terror and an unbreakable faith. He refused to yield. Not now. Not ever. He would find a path. He had no choice. He would unleash hell for her. He would salvage redemption. He would seize a chance at a future he believed beyond his reach. A sacrifice for love, the desert wind, a gritty exhalation from sun-baked lands, matched the residue of bitterness clinging to Jed's spirit. He stood rigid, the sinking sun painting grotesque caricatures with the gallows Snake had dared to erect in the town square. Bound to the rough-hewn timbers, Ellie's eyes, wide pools of stark terror and disbelief, reflected the encroaching despair. The hemp bit cruelly into her wrists. Snake Thompson, a human embodiment of venom, grinned, clearly relishing his dominance. Well, Stone, he drawled, his voice a silken threat. Looks like your dance card's full. Seed redemption. And maybe, just maybe, the little dove sees another dawn. Jed's jaw hardened into granite. His muscles coiled, yearning for release, for the catharsis of violence. But Ellie's pleading gaze, a silent directive, held him in check. He'd traded his hardware, the town's fragile defenses, for her life, a bargain that had proven insufficient. Snake craved it all. Redemption is yours, Jed conceded, his tone a monotone, stripped of inflection. Take it, just release her. A mirthless chortle escaped Snake, an arid sound that vibrated through Ellie like a shard of ice. Oh, Jedediah, you wound me. Where's the spark, the old fire? I anticipated more from the legendary stone. He circled her, the back of a gloved hand tracing the curve of her cheek. She recoiled, eyes squeezed shut in anticipation. I think I'll retain her. Leverage, you understand. Keeps you heroes from hatching any bright schemes. A glacial fury began to coalesce within Jed's core. He knew this path, the worn track of attrition, the desolate road of sacrifice, and its inevitable regrets. But this felt different. This time, he had something undeniably precious to preserve, someone to safeguard, no matter the cost. You won't lay a hand on her, Jed stated, his voice a simmering threat. Another derisive laugh erupted from Snake, setting Jed's teeth on edge. And what exactly will you do about it, Stone? You're unarmed, vulnerable. Jed advanced, each footfall deliberate. His gaze locked on Snake's, sparking an unspoken battle of wills. I'm going to propose a trade, Thompson. My ears are open, Snake replied, suspicion clouding his gaze. Release her, Jed reiterated. Take me in her stead. The offer hung in the air, pregnant with unspoken sacrifice. A collective gasp rippled through the previously silent onlookers. Ellie's eyes snapped open, forming a silent no. You? Snake scoffed. Why would I desire you? You're nothing but a burnt-out husk of a gunslinger, haunted by your past. Because you yearn to dismantle me, Jed countered, his voice ringing with a stark truth. You want to prove that even the mighty Jedediah Stone can be broken. Take me, torment me, execute me, but let her go. She is innocent in this. Ellie struggled against her restraints, tears carving tracks down her dusty cheeks. Jed, don't. Please. He fixed his gaze forward. He couldn't risk gazing at her agony lest his resolve crumble. Snake paused, weighing possibilities. He felt the tangible tension in the air. The town's breath hitched in his grasp, claiming Jed was a trophy, an affirmation of his supremacy. Keeping Ellie was problematic. She represented Praff, volatility, a potential catalyst for revolt. Very well, Stone, Snake finally conceded, a cruel smile stretching his lips. I accept your entreaty, but understand the parameters. You inherit her predicament, and you atone for your transgressions. Jed gave a curt nod, his face a mask of grim determination. He approached Ellie, his movements measured. He reached out, his weathered hand cradling her face with unexpected tenderness. Don't watch, he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. Just close your eyes. She shook her head, vision blurred by grief. I can't, Jed. I won't. He leaned down, pressing a lingering kiss to her brow. I love you, Ellie, he murmured, a raw sentiment ripped from his depths. Never doubt that. Then he pivoted to face Snake. Untie her. Snake signaled his men, who swiftly unshackled Ellie. She stumbled forward, reaching for Jed, but he held up a preemptive hand. Go, he commanded, his voice firm. Escape. Find safety. I won't abandon you, she pleaded, her voice cracking with sobs. You must, he countered, his eyes beseeching. Do this for me. Please, Ellie. With a final, devastating look, she spun and fled, vanishing into the encroaching shadows. Jed followed her silhouette until it dissolved, a bittersweet pang in his chest. He'd discovered a reason for living, only to relinquish it. But he knew it was the imperative course. Had to shield her, even at the cost of his own existence. Snake's henchmen seized Jed, dragging him roughly toward the post where Ellie had been confined. They secured him tightly, the coarse fibers biting into his flesh. Any final pronouncements? Stone? Snake inquired, his tone laced with malice. Jed surveyed the town, the faces of those he'd tried to safeguard. He saw apprehension, but beneath it, embers of resilience. He witnessed the spark of defiance he had kindled in their hearts. Redemption will be resurrected, he declared, his voice ringing with conviction. You cannot extinguish hope. A hollow laugh echoed from Snake. We shall see. He raised a hand, giving the signal. The noose settled around Jed's neck, the rough material abrasive against his skin. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. He envisioned Ellie, her empathy, her compassion, her unwavering belief in him. He wished her joy, a life unburdened by the shadows that had haunted him. Then, the floor vanished. Hidden at the town's edge, Ellie witnessed Jed's hanging, a silent scream trapped within her. She yearned to rush forward, to intervene, but knew it was futile. He was gone. Her heart shattered. The man she adored, who had offered her hope, had sacrificed everything. His act of profound love resonated within her. A guiding star in the encroaching darkness. She would never forget him. She would never forget his gift, and she would ensure his memory endured. Even as tears streamed, a surge of resolve ignited within her. Redemption might be under Snake Thompson's thumb, but it wasn't vanquished. Not yet. Jed's sacrifice had granted them an opportunity, a fragile flicker of hope to nurture. And she, Ellie Monroe, would stoke that flicker into an inferno. She would fight for redemption, for Jed's legacy, for the future he had died to secure. She would not allow his sacrifice to be in vain. Turning the tables Jed's defiant image, his gaze piercing hers while Snake's grimy grip tightened, seared itself onto Ellie's memory. His gruff declaration, tinged with desperate honesty, I love you, Ellie Monroe, reverberated in the sudden, heavy quiet. It wasn't merely the words, though they soothed an ache she hadn't fully acknowledged, but the stark exposure of his soul, his utter disregard for self-preservation, the unmistakable truth etched into the lines of his face. This wasn't the withdrawn loner she knew. This was a man prepared to offer his life as forfeit for hers. A soul forged anew. As the thugs hauled Jed away, Ellie didn't flee far. The shadowy recess behind the general store offered sanctuary, her breath catching in ragged sobs. Tears coursed down her cheeks, a torrent fueled by anguish, terror, and a nascent, fierce resolve. Jed had given her everything. Now, somehow, she had to return the gift. Not with mourning, but with action. For him. For redemption. For the future he believed they could seize. Swiping at her tears, Ellie forced clarity. Snake Thompson was more than just muscle. He was sly, driven by avarice, yet blinded by contempt for redemption's inhabitants. He deemed them docile, manageable. He saw Ellie as leverage. He was wrong. She possessed an intimate knowledge of redemption, an internal map etched deeper than any surveyor could achieve. The clandestine routes, forgotten cellars, the labyrinthine irrigation network. It was a mastery Snake could never acquire. Slipping from the alley, Ellie moved with purpose. Twilight painted elongated, dramatic forms across the dusty expanse of the street. The outlaws celebrated their triumph, their coarse laughter booming from the saloon's confines. Snake's voice cut through the cacophony, bragging of his dominion over the town. She headed towards the livery, hugging the darkness. Inside, Hemlock, the stableman, fretted over the horses, worry carving deep lines into his face. Ellie? What are you doing here? Find safety. I need a horse, Mr. Hemlock, she stated, her voice steady. "And I need you to rally the townsfolk. Tell them to convene at the abandoned mill within the hour. Tell them Jedediah Stone offered himself for our sake. Tell them we unite now, or lose everything." Hemlock gawked, eyes widening in disbelief. "But Snake, he'll slaughter us all." "Not if we outwit him," Ellie retorted. "He believes he holds all the cards, but he doesn't know this town as we do." A spark of resolve ignited within Hemlock's gaze, and he nodded. "I'll do it, Ellie. I'll spread the word." Ellie saddled her mare, her movements swift and efficient. Leading the horse from the stable, a metallic reflection caught her eye. It was Jed's rifle, the one he had reluctantly cleaned and polished only days prior. He hadn't taken it. Had he foreseen his demise? A wave of sorrow threatened to engulf her, but she suppressed it. She couldn't afford weakness. Not now. She seized the rifle, its weight familiar and reassuring in her grasp. The abandoned mill stood sentinel on the town's perimeter, a decaying monument to redemption's history. Upon arrival, Ellie found a cluster of townsfolk huddled, their expressions a complex mix of dread and determination. Hemlock stood before them, shoulders squared. "She's here," he announced, his voice surprisingly resonant. Dismounting, Ellie addressed the crowd. "Thank you for answering the call," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "I know you're afraid. I share that fear. But Jedediah Stone sacrificed himself to safeguard us. He exemplified true bravery. We cannot let his sacrifice be meaningless." She laid out her scheme, leveraging her intimate knowledge of the town's hidden pathways and the outlaw's predictable patterns. She spoke with fervor and conviction, kindling a flicker of hope within the townsfolk's eyes. "Snake believes he can simply stroll in and claim what he desires," Ellie declared, her voice growing in intensity. "He sees us as feeble. He expects us to surrender and perish. But he is mistaken. We are redemption, and we will not yield without a struggle." A murmur of assent flowed through the gathering. Several of the men tightened their grip on their rifles. Even the women, normally reserved and mild-mannered, stood resolutely, their eyes hardening with determination. As Ellie concluded her plan, a figure emerged from the penumbra. It was Sarah Jenkins, the town's blacksmith, her countenance grim. "I may not be much of a fighter," she rasped, "but I know how to make things explode." She brandished a handful of roughly crafted dynamite sticks. A cheer erupted from the crowd. The momentum was shifting. Back in town, Snake Thompson held court at the saloon, a whiskey bottle clutched in his hand, Jed bound to a chair in the corner. "That preacher's girl showed more backbone than I figured," he sneered, "but she ain't got the guts to come back here. She's probably hightailing it to California right now." Jed remained silent, his gaze riveted on Snake, his jaw clenched tight. He understood Ellie. He knew she wouldn't abandon them. And that frightened him more than any pain Snake could inflict. Suddenly, the saloon doors crashed open, and a young boy, barely old enough to sprout whiskers, staggered inside, his face ashen with terror. "Snake! They're coming! The whole town they're armed!" Snake Thompson's grin dissolved. He slammed his fist against the table, shattering glasses. "What in blazes are you rambling about?" "It's true," the boy stammered. "They're everywhere. They're using the tunnels, the alleys. They know every inch of this town." Panic seized the saloon like a contagion. The outlaws scrambled for their weapons, their boasting replaced by stark fear. Snake seized Jed by the collar, his eyes burning with rage. "This is on you, Stone. You and that meddling woman." He dragged Jed towards the entrance, intending to use him as a human shield. But as he emerged outside, he was confronted with a spectacle that froze his blood. The street teemed with people, armed with rifles, shotguns, and whatever implements they could lay claim to. Ellie stood at the forefront, Jed's rifle clutched firmly in her hands, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. "Snake Thompson," she proclaimed, her voice echoing through the street. "This is our town, and you are no longer welcome here." The townsfolk of Redemption stood unified behind her, their resolve unwavering. Fear had given way to defiance. They were prepared to fight. They were prepared to reclaim their town. And they were prepared to avenge Jedediah Stone, the man who had illuminated the true meaning of courage and sacrifice. The balance of power had shifted. Reborn from ashes, dust devils danced across Jedediah Stone's ravaged face, mingling with the welling crimson from his injuries. A coppery tang infused with grit, and the ghost of long-forgotten fear coated his tongue. Barely clinging to life, he was Snake's discarded messenger-broken scarecrow left to rot at Redemption's border, a dire warning to any foolish enough to cross him. Sunlight, brutal and unforgiving, stabbed through Jedediah's eyelids. The buildings of Redemption swam before him, a fractured panorama. Distant shouts, cries laced with panic, reached him as though filtered through layers of cotton. Every attempt to move unleashed a blaze of agony in his ribs, pinning him to the unforgiving ground. Then, a beacon. Ellie. She sprinted towards him, terror and purpose etched on her features, her blonde hair a streaming banner of gold. He willed his paralyzed vocal cords to warn her away, to shout that he was poison, but only a strangled breath escaped. She dropped to his side, her hands trembling like frightened birds as she reached for his face. Her touch surged through him like a lightning strike, banishing the creeping cold. He saw tears gathering in her eyes, mirroring the torment in his own soul. "Jed! Oh, Jed!" she cried, her voice raw with emotion. "What have they done?" A weak smile flickered across his lips, a pale imitation of the man he once was. "Just a nick, Ellie," he croaked, the words catching like thorns. "Been worse?" He knew she saw through the flimsy lie, that she registered the blood, the contusions, the utter depletion etched into every line of his face. Still, she didn't press, didn't probe, only held his hand, her grip a silent anchor. "Don't waste your breath," she urged, her gaze scanning his. "Save it. We need to get you somewhere safe." He shook his head, a motion that ignited a new wave of torment. "No time," he rasped, his voice fading to a thread. "I need to tell you." She lowered her head, her ear almost touching his lips. "Tell me later, Jed. Please. Just stay with me." A ragged cough tore through him. "Might not be a later, Ellie," he whispered, locking his gaze on her face. "And I can't leave without you knowing." Her grip tightened, her knuckles bone white. Knowing what? He drew a shuddering breath, battling the searing pain. For years he'd guarded this secret, entombed deep within his heart, terrified of confessing it, convinced it would be met with scorn. But now, sprawled on the unforgiving earth, with the specter of death looming, the dam had broken. "I love you, Ellie," he exhaled, the words stripped bare. The confession hung in the air, fragile as spun glass. He scrutinized her expression, bracing for disgust, anger, the pity he believed he deserved. Instead, he saw shock, then a dawning, hesitant understanding. Her eyes widened, and a single tear escaped, carving a glistening path. "Jeddah," she breathed, barely audible. He squeezed his eyes shut, anticipating the inevitable rejection. He was a shattered wreck, a killer, a wanderer who offered only shadows. He wasn't worthy of her devotion. Never had been. Then her hand cupped his cheek, her touch feather-light. He opened his eyes to find her leaning close, her face inches from his. "I love you too, Jed," she breathed, her voice thick with a tenderness that resonated through him. "Always have." The words washed over him like a balm, a sunbeam piercing the abyss. Hope flickered, a fragile ember against the encroaching darkness. "I abandoned you, Ellie," he choked out, his voice thick with remorse. "Ran away. Thought I was shielding you." She shook her head, her eyes pools of compassion. "It wounded me, Jed," she confessed, her voice quiet but firm. "But I understood. I knew you wrestled with your demons." He'd spent eons believing himself unworthy, convinced his past would forever mar him, rendering him incapable of joy. But now, gazing into her eyes, he found forgiveness, acceptance, a love that defied his flaws. "I'm not worthy of you, Ellie," he whispered, a plea disguised as an admission. A radiant smile bloomed on her face, chasing away the gloom that clung to his soul. "Maybe not," she teased, her voice playful. "But whoever truly gets what they merit." She bent and kissed him, a feather-light pressure that tasted of redemption and nascent hope. A kiss that erased the years of anguish and regret, a promise of a future he had long since abandoned. He returned the kiss, his heart overflowing with a love he believed irretrievably lost. In that moment, sprawled on the bloodied ground amidst havoc and brutality, he felt reborn. The residue of his past had been swept clean, replaced by the possibility of a fresh starter beginning with Ellie. Yet, he knew their battle was far from over. Snake remained at large, and he wouldn't relent until he'd obliterated everything they held dear. He had to protect Ellie, to safeguard redemption, even at the cost of his own life. He broke the kiss, his eyes burning with renewed resolve. "We have to stop him, Ellie." His voice rang with newfound strength. "We have to fight back." She nodded, her eyes reflecting his determination. "I know," she affirmed. "And we will. Together." Their romance, once a fragile flicker against the void, now roared into a full blaze, fueled by optimism, absolution, and a mutual dedication to protect their beloved community. It was a tale of love resurrected from the ashes of despair, a testament to the unyielding strength of the human spirit. He looked at her, at the fortitude and bravery that emanated from her, and vowed to do anything for her, even meet death head-on. He would confront Snake, would stare into the abyss, if it meant safeguarding her well-being and happiness. He had rediscovered his will to live, and he would wage a relentless war to hold on to it.